everybody. My name is Mary Beth Thaman. I'm the Director of Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Arts for the City of Kettering, and welcome to the Rosewood birthday party. And we are honored, truly honored, to have some super special guests here tonight.
We're delighted to celebrate our landmark anniversaries here in 2015. Congratulations to Rosewood for celebrating their 30th anniversary here. And so Rosewood, as we talked about, was opened in 1965, 50 years ago. Not only is this a landmark year for Rosewood, but Kettering was proclaimed a city on June 24th, 1955 by the Secretary of State of Ohio. So we're celebrating our 60th anniversary this year of being a city. Kettering has continued since then to be the community of choice to live, work, and play. And I know you hear that a lot, the live, work, and play theme, and you hear it a lot because we believe in that. We believe it's a great community to live in, to work in, and in case here, to play in. Rosewood has spent the past 3 decades providing quality art, educational, and cultural arts experiences to all ages. Rosewood is not just an important asset to the community, but an essential part of our community's health, well-being. From an elementary school to a community destination, Rosewood has contributed significantly to Kettering over the past 50 years. At this time, I'd like to introduce somebody who's no stranger to this building and was here for the entire time I believe Rosewood was a school. And he no longer lives in the community here, excuse me, but I know his heart's still here in the community. And that was the principal, Richard Dilgard, and the principal of Rosewood Elementary.
The most important person that a principal can have is a secretary. And Kay Nelson, if you were ever there, you probably met her. She was in the office. She and I started and ended, I think we're the only ones that started and ended Rosewood the whole time it was in business, if I say. And I was so lucky to have that lady. You just can't, all the superlatives are just not enough. She was just a fantastic person, and she was good to the kids. If I had to get out of this office, I didn't have to worry about it. I knew she just seemingly knew what to do and how to do it. So I would like to mention that in the first kindergarten class at the first year of Rosewood School, which is not the same thing as this building, the kindergartners would now be 47 years old. Her name was Lillian Frank. You don't have to remember that, but she was a super humanities teacher. I went into education as an elementary major at college, and you have to take a lot of different things to become an elementary teacher, and humanities was a big thing. And of all the wonderful things she told me, and there's a point to what I'm saying, that she emphasized that the art and function go together. When this building was being built, there were other buildings that were going to be built, and they had to have an architect for each one. And so they didn't use the usual architect here, they used Eugene Betts. And I made a building that is so unique in comparison to the generic school building. And I loved this building. Every time I walked in, I thought, there's Lillian telling me again, function, a beautifully functioning school, now it's turning into be a beautiful functioning arts center. And there's Eugene Betts, and I just love being here. Classrooms kept empty, we had to keep closing buildings. Levies didn't pass, money became tight, and it kept that way most of the time. A lot of things had to be done because of that. And finally, they had to close enough buildings. We had 20 years at Rosewood School, but only 18 years in this building. So this is a very new building to have to be closed, but hard decisions were made, and you can't go around having a lot of empty classrooms. It's just too costly. And the money wasn't coming in either. It wasn't fun leaving Rosewood. I just felt like if I had a beautiful picture and all of a sudden it's gone. Because this building, when I walked into it, I felt like I was walking into a piece of art. Eugene Betts, I think, did a marvelous job of making a building that was not only a school, but a place of beauty. And coming in every day, I had that feeling that I was walking into a really fine building. This is a treasure here. This is a treasure. And I'm awfully glad that if I had to give up my building, which I consider this building to be, then I'm awfully glad that the Rosewood Arts Centre is here in my building. And when I say you're welcome to it, I don't mean it nastily. I mean, yeah, I'm so glad you're here. So.
Thank you so much. For those of you who have not been to a PK presentation before, anyone here who has not been to PK format presentation? All right, sir and young lady. The presentations are formatted in a 20 by 20 format, 20 slides, 20 seconds per slide. We're really honored to have themed presentations tonight by our distinguished presenters, so thank you guys. Matt Sauer will be starting us off. Matt Sauer is a Dayton native and has his own architectural practice. He lives in a restored 1880s house in South Park, a wonderful historic neighborhood, with his wife, 2 daughters, and dog Willie. His talk tonight is titled Common Traits of Mid-Century Architecture through 1980.
Can you all hear me? Is this loud enough? I'm going to be talking about architecture in Kettering between 60 and 80. So that seems like a sort of long span for mid-century, but really building technology doesn't advance that quickly in some ways, and so stylistically you can have the same elements sort of appear as late as 1979, as we'll find out. The last time I publicly professed my love for mid-century modern, I wrote an article about it in the Dayton Daily News in 2013. This building in Dayton by Lagerdrast and Walter, little-known firm. The building was promptly torn down a year later, so hopefully that doesn't happen to any of the buildings here tonight. Why all these sort of stylistic cues that all the architects seem to use in their buildings from this period? Well, everything's a product of its time. So the architecture, is reliant on certain package of building materials, certain skilled labor, and so you get a lot of buildings that use brick and limestone. Like these examples, many Kettering schools use the sort of brick and limestone motif, altar using a sort of tan brick instead of the red brick that's more common. Unitized aluminum windows are another big feature that you sort of see but never think about, but these are prefab elements, curtain walls that you can see on a lot of buildings from this era. Here's a selection of both office buildings and institutional buildings. And by the way, if you see a building you particularly love, use your kazoo or whistle and make your love for it known. Precast concrete, so not just breeze block, but entire building facades were made out of precast concrete in the 60s. The building in the middle and the bottom, they just sort of chopped off some of the precast units to make an entrance. Pretty cool. Building lettering and signage was not just the sort of sans serif fonts you think about when you think of mid-century and Helvetica. There was a lot of variation within that period, especially the cool block serif letters on the Kettering Government Center signage and the bike parking. Steeples and crosses, another element that became very streamlined, perhaps the sort of space age influence. You see that influence a lot. I really love the Kettering church on Wilmington, the Korean church on Wilmington in the lower left. Such a slender little steeple. It's really cool. This is my shorthand for the ubiquitous altar face of all these churches. So the gable end of churches with the altar has this sort of tuxedo t-shirt effect where you get this really fancy material in the middle of what's usually a typical brick facade behind it. But a lot of variation within that, school of architecture. Planters, I think, came primarily from sort of the Frank Lloyd Wright, low horizontal composition. But, look at Central Christian Church, what a great setting for a flowering tree. Just a beautiful little, piece of landscaping there. Stained glass of this era was all dalle de verre, or frequently dalle de verre, which is stained glass chunks set in concrete or epoxy resin instead of lead. Central Christian, again, is called out here because it's just an amazing, exuberant design of their stained glass window. The Charlie Brown roof. So you see a lot of zigzags, probably never think about them, but when you put them all in one slide, you say, whoa, that's a common motif. I like the Korean church again. Theirs must have leaked, so they built a gable roof over top of it. It's too bad. And that's actually in Moraine, so sorry. So mega roofs is another common element. That might be a mid-century building if it has a mega roof like the Kettering Government Center. I'll point out that Good Shepherd Lutheran has a really amazingly large, long roof that's like an inverted boat. If you ever had a chance to drive by it, note the roof because it's really big. Obviously, Kettering Government Center has the, one of the most impressive roofs, but it has a really great cantilever at one end. It's got the sort of concrete buttress resisting all that force. And what's that in the middle? Anybody know? Flying buttress. What else on the ridge line or the eave? Downspout. So Frank Lloyd Wright, in his Westcott house in Springfield, if anyone's ever been there, 1912, has the same detail where the water doesn't get piped down into the ground, just dumps off into what's typically a dry well or a cistern at the base. You can also see that at Good Shepherd. Mansard roofs, maybe we're pushing it into the 70s here a little bit with mansard roofs, but any multifamily apartment complex from that era really is characterized by this. Even the one-story pool house community room in that one has a mansard roof. Arches are another element that may come, toward that later end, but really influenced by architecture in California, the Regency style, where some historical flourishes were making their way back into a modern palette. Stairwells were buried in the inside of buildings for so many years until the 60s when they were allowed to breathe and come out and be expressive on the facades of buildings. All these buildings have stairwells that are typically lit up at night and are very monumental gestures to the street. So I'm going to close with two slides about Central Christian Church. I really think this is one of the most amazing buildings in Kettering. It's got great detailing. It's got these buttresses along the side. It's got this amazing dalle de verre glass window like we showed before, and then sort of a campanile style steeple tower. And as it turns out, it was designed by Lagerdraust and Walter, the firm that designed the building that got torn down that I loved in Dayton. So I feel like it came full circle. So anyhow, hopefully you can go out and have renewed appreciation for a lot of the mid-century gems that are in Kettering. Thank you.
A little bit about Patrick. Patrick is an architect who has lived here in Kettering for over 16 years with his wife and son, who is a junior at Fairmont. He works downtown at John Poe Architects. Patrick is past president of the AIA Dayton chapter and loves to participate in events that promote architecture, woohoo, like this, and with children, particularly to children, participating in the AIA student design, Lego events, and career days. He is also a PK fan, speaking at several formal and informal PK events about Legos, board games, and architecture. You'll see more about one of his favorite hobbies in his presentation.
All right, so Kettering is the place I've lived the longest of any one time. It's the only place my son knows is home, and I'm very proud to live here and call this my home. So the next slide is going to show where I live. Our neighbors every year bring out, and normally props aren't allowed, but this picture of our neighborhood when it was built in 57. So you can look at this later. So I live in a twisty suburb on the same street as Nancy Cartwright, who's the voice of Bart Simpson. And that's my house now. We thought that giant oak trees lived there all along, but it's not in this picture. So here it's grown up to be that giant tree. Now, there are some really cool mid-century homes in Kettering, not just ranches like we live in or tri-levels. We visited this last year as part of our AIA Dining by Design tour. This is kind of a sprawling mid-century home that we did as part of our Dining by Design tour that was pretty cool. So what were people doing in the 60s? Well, they were shopping at Hills and Dales, which doesn't exist anymore, and at the Kroger's, which was a hip-looking grocery store in that photo there. Hills and Dales is now hippie engineering, where I go to all the time. Or maybe they were listening to groovy hip jazz singers like Bennett. Cindy and I saw him last year at Fray's. He's aged pretty gracefully over the years, but here's an album that we have of him in the 60s performing at the White House. So the 60s were pretty cool. Or they were seeing movies, like in this pretty cool movie theater on Dorothy Lane. Of course, this is going to show up again probably in other people's... There's only like 3 really cool buildings that everyone's going to have, and everyone... there's more. But anyway, this is the Googie style of design, which is pop art. But anyway, I'm a James Bond fan. So they were seeing the James Bond movies. So Dr. No came out in 1962, same time the embargo happened, which lasted as long as Kettering almost. And it was a Cold War film, and it highlighted the Cold War tension that happened that doesn't even exist anymore. I really loved the set design and the cool buildings and things that were in James Bond movies. Ken Adams' design here in the upper left was just some room that this guy was being interrogated in, same time as the Houston Astrodome was built down in Texas. Don't they look kind of the same? Richard Dilgard was an architect, and he's a house he did in Pennsylvania. I had to study him in college and had to build a birdhouse that would work in one of his yards. There's the set, and I just think it's really cool how these 60s sets reminded me of homes at the same time. So these movie sets were reflective of the homes and the designs that were in vogue. For Much with Love, he was busy working on Dr. Strangelove, so all the sets in those weren't very cool. They were cool for what they were, but they weren't that kind of mid-century design. They were train scenes or things set in Istanbul. Back to Goldfinger, though. He was back. I loved that. Absolutely. Why did he have to build this giant room to show all the bad guys his plan, only to kill him 5 seconds later? But that was a really cool room where he showed all the gangsters that helped him. So this architecture has actually influenced me for my life and has become a design influence for me. Actually, this is a building that I helped work on in Michigan before I left. That was inspired from Goldfinger. These rooms really do exist and look like something out of Goldfinger in real life. So this design aesthetic has carried over into my real life. Thunderball was in '65. It led into Sean Connery quitting, but he never said never again. He came back a couple of years later in that movie. Whole contract thing with that. So what else happened in '65? Never Say Never Again also came up with Spectre. That's where the guy got electrocuted in the chair. Spectre also is the name of the new movie that's coming out this year. Just as a warning, where'd she go? If you ever get called into Shayna's office, don't sit in the left chair, okay? '65 is when Rosewood was built. We heard about that earlier. Gene Betts, my favorite Kettering architect, designed it. We'll talk about him a little bit more later. But my son spent many summer camps here after school doing art classes and all that when he was a bit younger. There's Gene Betts' office. Matt talked about how we've written articles in newspapers about our favorite Dayton architecture. I wrote this, not even knowing it was Gene Betts' office. I just driven by it so many times and fell in love with it that I researched it, found out what it was, and wrote a newspaper article about it, and really love it, and really fell in love with Gene Betts because of it. '67, You Only Live Twice came out. A whole interest in Japanese architecture came on. If you ever watch that movie, pay attention. Henderson offers him a martini stirred, not shaken, and James Bond accepts it. That's the opposite of normal. Love Mr. Osato's office. It's this really cool, again, office set piece. That's just this really neat 60s office that I would love to get. That's where he finds the Siamese vodka. It's just really awful. And then this lower set's a little more kind of high-tech space age with this. And then the 70s, Mr. Betts did something that's, a little beyond. We already talked about the government center. It's a little bit beyond the mid-century timeline is in the 60s, but it's a building that's really cool and I really love. And at least wanted to, again, because I love Betts so much and his work, I wanted to end on his building and how interesting it looks. And of course, I always picture that there may be a secret villain, buildings plans examiner, petting his cat, waiting to launch a missile or some sort of secret attack on the City of Kettering from his hidden base here. So thank you. And thank you for Terry for putting up with my humor.
That was not photoshopped. That is a real image of Terry in his office with Mr. Bigglesworth. I think that was his name. Our next presenter is Ron Hundt. Ron is an almost lifelong resident of Kettering, except for 2 years in Cleveland. Hey. City planner, artist, and beard painting fool. He's a father of 3, a grandpa to 2 grandgirls, and a grandson on the way, a devoted husband, but not necessarily in that order. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Oh, wow, you've already started. That's part of my 20 seconds. I'm going to talk about the legend of Ree, because everything you'll see here is by Ron Entertainment, which is Ree, in case you hadn't seen that. It's how 2 local institutions came to at age of 60. Kettering is one of them, and I'm the other one, and there's one of those painted beers. One of these 2 people is respected, and the other not so much. Kettering was a famous innovator. I'm a famous procrastinator. My PK got done at 4 o'clock today. Charles Kettering, known as an engineer, an inventor, an entrepreneur. He was responsible. All these, you get the picture, something. I'm not so much responsible, but what I am is the next slide. He is working on a self-starter. I am an artist, a planner, and a provocateur. And I'm a provocateur because I like to say provocateur, as opposed to, well, I'm also a rebel. That's me, not really painting the Mona Lisa, but a friend of mine did that for me to kind of emulate the fact that I do like the art. This is an important message that Kettering has for us all. It's about retrying. Again, another R-E word. It's important to know that he had to retry a bunch of times. In fact, one of the things you may not be aware of is he helped develop leaded fuel. Some of you know that, some of you don't, but obviously that was a problem. You can't see the word Kettering, but I really think of Kettering as a small Mayberry. At least when I was growing up, we had ponds to swim in. We had tree forts. We had all this kind of stuff. It was the true reality show, not this Jersey Shore stuff that you see nowadays. This is my school, George L. Ernst, where I went 3 years. That's my first grade classroom. But this was a reuse project. It's now a church. It is now the Life Point Church. That's the only one that fades in. I don't know why, but the other ones didn't fade in. And they built that sanctuary that you see circled. We also have local boy does cool, and somehow that got off. Gone are the days when you would build your own skateboard with 2 skates and a board, and that's what we used to do, but I think reverberate is a word that I'd use for Deerdeck because he really brought a lot of energy to this site. Fairmont East was a high school my wife went to. We had 2 at the time, Fairmont East, Fairmont West. We originally had Fairmont where Fairmont is now, but then we had Fairmont East, but now Fairmont East is Kettering Middle School. They rededicated it as a middle school instead of that. Now, here is an aerial that you may not know where it is. That's Delco product or General Motors plant. see how naked the ground was. If you see an aerial nowadays, it's all wooded. I mean, because we have street trees, we have creeks that have trees on them, and it has been reforested. It looks a lot like these pictures. You've seen this picture before. It is now a church. It was rebooted as the Shelter Church. I think Terry Welker should take a lot of credit for helping the architect get that project done, frankly, because I think he spent a lot of time, I don't know, force feeding him, but they had a lot of iterations of their plans. But they finally got it done, and they're doing a good job. Now, this property is not in Kettering, but it had a lot of Kettering employees. A lot of people that lived in Kettering worked at Frigidaire, and then after Frigidaire came the Chevy truck plant. But now Fuyao is moving into a portion of it. They're retooling a large part of that building. Here's something you may or may not know. We are looking at the possibility of combining the public library and Rosewood Arts Centre if we have to get rid of this school, and I'm not saying we should. But the idea of a library, you know, what's it going to be in the future? Because all books pretty much are on disc, or you can get them in many different ways instead of paper. I took this picture because look at the moraine honey locusts that are still there. They've been retained. And this is what they looked like in the late 50s. That's how much they've grown, and they're really statuesque along Far Hills Avenue. So that's been retained. Get the gist of all this stuff. This is Town and Country. The drawing below is what this will look like. But you can see there was 2 entrances to the back, and that's what they want to redo. They want to get you back to the back of the shopping center. And I used to walk to Baskin-Robbins, which was there. This was the place that I first took my first moonlight skate with a girl when it was a skating rink, and it's now Highfield Doors. And Rodney Highfield should be credited with reinvesting in this property and making this former, actually was a drive-through beer place. I threw this picture in because I couldn't help but love the fact that we had all these firemen in one picture of an old shot. And there's the Metropolitan and Town and Country Shopping Center. But we now, because of all the need for what firefighters do, we have to recruit instead of using volunteers. And so we were recruiting instead of using volunteers nowadays. This, unfortunately, is a landmark. It used to be called the Inn, most recently La Berge. It is now the site for the Fifth Third Bank that was at Town and Country. It's unfortunate sometimes you lose landmarks like this, and this just shows you that sometimes they get to be removed. Now I'm going to talk about retirement because I've got 5 more years left. And so I need to think of who's going to bring the color to our office when I leave, because when I retire, the orange goes away, the blue goes away, the green goes away. No one's going to paint their beard like I paint my beard and wear a blue suit. I'm going to leave you with this quote. It's my quote, unlike Charles Kettering. The next best thing to finding a purpose in life is finding a repurpose. And that's what I'm looking for right now. Over the next 5 years, I need to find my repurpose. I want to thank you for listening to me and all my re's. And I'm sorry that I'm not an architect, but thank you.
All right, well, thanks everyone. That actually concludes our Powered by PK presentations. Here's some of the things coming up. We really have a lot of cake left, so I need all of you to at least take a quarter of the cake home with you. Thank you so much for being a part of our 30th anniversary and kickoff for Suburbanscapes. We really appreciate you guys here. And Matt, Patrick, and Ron, thank you so much. You guys are amazing.